There are soldiers who are born to defend their homeland, and there are soldiers who are born to build empires in enemy territory. Vladimir Padrino Lopez is one of the latter. Broward County, Florida. A house bought for $635,000. The registered owner is named Jesus Maria Padrino Renault. He's not an American businessman. He's not a Wall Street investor. He's the uncle of Vladimir Padrino Lopez, the Minister of Defense of Venezuela. The question is simple and devastating. Where does a relative of a socialist general get more than $500,000 to buy properties in the country that his government calls the empire? The answer is written in corporate documents, real estate records, and DEA files. The Padrino family controls at least 24 companies in the United States and Venezuela. Yij's Music. They own 14 properties valued at $4.5 million in Florida and Texas. 10 of those properties are registered in the name of 3 family businesses, Brisana LLC, Taurus Realty Group, and Majalud LLC. With a combined value exceeding $2.2 million, we're not talking about an entrepreneur who made a fortune selling arepas in Miami. Music. We're talking about the man who controls the tanks, the planes, the military bases, and the arsenals of Venezuela, the same man who publicly declares himself a convinced socialist. Music. A fierce anti-imperialist, a sworn enemy of American capitalism, the same man who privately has his family living the American dream, while 25 million Venezuelans survive on $5 of minimum wage per month. His official resume, Music, seems impeccable. General-in-Chief of the Bolivarian Army, yes, Minister of Defense since 2014. Music, the military man who has held that position the longest in Venezuela's recent history, the guarantor of the armed forces, loyalty to the Chavista regime, the indispensable man. But there's another resume, the one that doesn't appear in official biographies, the one written in the accusations from the United States Department of Justice. Music. $15 million, that's the reward the United States offers for information leading to his arrest and conviction. The charges: conspiracy to Music, distribute cocaine on board aircraft, narco-terrorism. We're not talking about an official accused of administrative corruption. We're talking about a minister of defense accused of facilitating cocaine trafficking from his country to the United States. How is that possible? But how did the man who controls Venezuela's weapons build a real estate empire in the enemy country? How does a general who declares himself revolutionary have relatives living in Florida mansions while his people line up to get bread? And the question that no one can, Music, answer. On the early morning of January 3, 2026, when American Music helicopters bombed Caracas and captured Nicolas Maduro in 47 seconds, Music. Where was Vladimir Padrino Lopez? The Minister of Defense defended nothing, gave no orders to resist, didn't mobilize troops, didn't try to rescue his president. Maduro is rotting today in an isolation cell in Colorado. Padrino Lopez walks free through Caracas. Music appears on television, gives speeches, still controls the armed forces. An American intelligence error, a strategic decision, or something much darker. Stop before continuing. I need to ask you something. What you're about to hear connects the Venezuelan Ministry of Defense with international drug trafficking networks, with a corporate labyrinth music of dozens of shell companies, with million-dollar properties hidden under the names of front men. These are not speculations. They are public registration documents. Music, data journalism investigations, testimonies from military deserters, Music who decided to speak. This story makes many governments uncomfortable. That's why the algorithm buries it. If you believe these truths deserve to come to light, subscribe to the channel and activate Music. The bell. Your click is the only thing that can break the silence. This is the story of the socialist general with capitalist mansions, the revolutionary with an empire, Music in the empire, now the most wanted minister who remains free. This is the story of Vladimir Padrino Lopez. To understand how a minister of defense builds a $4.5 million empire in the enemy country, you have to follow the money. You track the companies, identify the front men, and start in an unexpected place, a business park in Sunrise, Florida, north of Miami. The glass door doesn't draw attention. The lobby is modest. There are tourist brochures from Venezuela on the walls. A sign identifies the place. Trámites Consulares Incorporated. The director is Ludmila Padrino Valderrama, lawyer, former Miss Venezuela contestant, and cousin of Vladimir Padrino Lopez. The company was registered in Texas in 2010, 8 years before the United States sanctioned Padrino, 10 years before he was accused of conspiracy to distribute cocaine. What does this company do? It manages Venezuelan passport extensions, offers translation services, and something more, something that borders on the grotesque. It processes political asylum applications for Venezuelans fleeing persecution from Nicolas Maduro's regime. Read that again. The cousin of the Minister of Defense profits from the exodus of Venezuelans escaping the government that her cousin protects with tanks. In 2019, the company organized an educational workshop on how to apply for refuge for those escaping political persecution, the same persecution that the armed forces under Padrino's command execute every day. The irony doesn't end there. Tramites Consulares shares the same address in Caracas with another family business, Primaplast CA, a paint factory. The director of Primaplast is Yara's Music Betancourt, the wife of Vladimir Padrino Lopez. Ludmila Padrino is a partner in both companies. The cousin connects the businesses in Miami with the businesses in Caracas. The corporate labyrinth begins to take shape, but Primaplast is not just any factory. It's the master key to the family's enrichment. 80% of the shares belong to three companies: Unicorp Corporation, Gemil Corporation, and Desmoines Finance. The last two are linked to Jesus Maria Padrino Renault, the uncle who bought the $635,000 music mansion in Broward. The general's wife, Yaraset Music, figures as director in all three companies. In 2003, Yaraset Betancourt joined the board of directors of Primaplast. It was no coincidence. That same year, Hugo Chavez created Music Cadavi, the Currency Administration Commission. The system was music simple and devastatingly corrupt. Selected companies could buy U.S. and dollars at a preferential rate, far below the market, supposedly to import raw materials. But while the Bolivar plummeted on the black market, music, those cheap dollars, turned into fortunes. Ludmila Padrino herself explained it in a public letter. All the original partners of Prismaplast Music had signed in favor of the recall referendum against Hugo Chavez. That's why they were denied access to preferential dollars. The solution was to appoint someone to the board who hadn't signed. Yaris Betancourt, the wife of then Colonel Padrino Lopez, was perfect. According to records, Yara was still linked to Prismaplast in 2009, 6 years accessing subsidized dollars. Between 2004 and 2012, the company received approximately $4 million music dollars through Cadavi for importing music raw materials to manufacture paints, pigments, and chemical products. Music. Most of the imports came from the United States, the country that Chavismo calls the Empire. Today, the Primaplast factory is music abandoned. Located in the industrial zone of Charallave, 45 music minutes from Caracas, a one-story building surrounded by concrete walls topped with barbed wire. A shirtless guard watches the entrance. He says it's been closed for 1 or 2 years. He says it belongs music to a lady who lives in the United States. He doesn't know her name, but the corporate records music do. Yaraset Betancourt, the wife of the Minister of Defense. While the Venezuelan factory rots, the American properties flourish. Ludmila Padrino, the first director of Tramites Consulares, owns a house in Houston, Texas, valued at more than $500,000. Her sister Janet Padrino has another house in Weston, north of Miami, also valued at more than $500,000, coincidentally near the office that processes asylums for those fleeing Venezuela. 10 family properties are registered in the name of 3 companies: Brisana LLC, Utaris Realty Group, and Majalud LLC. Total value more than $2.2 million. According to the Busfile business database, 5 of the Padrino family's American companies generate estimated annual revenues of just over $500,000. In 2019, several relatives of the general, including Ludmila, Jesus Maria, and Music Jeanette, published a video publicly distancing themselves from him. "What will your legacy be, cousin?" they asked. "Will it be based on the promise you once made to us to remain an institutional soldier in service to the people? Or will it be leaving misery, hunger, and crime?" The question hung in the air, but the properties in Florida are still there. The companies keep operating, the dollars keep flowing, the socialist general with a capitalist empire, the revolutionary who buys in the empire, the minister of defense whose family profits from the tragedy he helped create. There's a brutal irony in the name of Vladimir Padrino Lopez. Music, an irony that explains everything that came after. May 30, 1963, Santa Rosalga Parish, Caracas. Music. A child is born. His father, a convinced communist, decides that this child will bear the name of one of the most successful revolutionaries of the 20th century, Vladimir. For Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, better known as Music Lenin, the father of the Soviet Union. From the cradle, that child was destined to be revolutionary, raised among Marx's books, dead photographs of Lenin, speeches about class struggle. His father, José Manuel Padrino Renault, dreamed that his son would fight imperialism, destroy capitalism, music build a socialist world. He succeeded. That child became the revolutionary his father wanted, but with a small detail that Lenin would never have forgiven: Music. That revolutionary built a capitalist empire of millions of dollars. Music in the heart of the empire he supposedly fought. What would Lenin say today if he saw that his namesake has mansions in Florida? The young Vladimir had no military vocation. Music, according to what he himself said in a 2021 interview. He only showed up at the Venezuelan military academy to accompany a high school friend. The friend didn't make it. He did. That's how things are. Well, he said with the calmness of someone who knows music that destiny decided for him. On July 5, 1984, Vladimir Padrino Lopez graduated from the military academy with the promotion of Brigadier General Juan Gomez Music Mireles, infantry branch, 21 years old, a newly graduated lieutenant with the name of a Russian revolutionary and the future ahead of him. And then he met the man who would change his life. At the military academy, Padrino was a student of Hugo Chavez. The future commander saw something in that young man with the surname Padrino. He saw the ideological fire that the father had planted. Chavez revived in the student the socialist political thought that had slept in his blood since the cradle. Padrino absorbed every word, every speech, every promise of transformation. He became a Chavista before Chavism existed. But when the time came to act, Chavez didn't call him. February 4th, 1992, coup d'état against President Carlos, music Ander GC's PGC Res tanks in the streets of Caracas. Lieutenant Colonel Hugo Chavez and a group of rebel officers tried to take power. They fail. Vladimir Padrino El Gipez did not participate. Chavez did not involve him in the operation. Why? He never explained. Perhaps he considered Padrino more valuable as a hidden piece. Perhaps he simply didn't trust him enough, or perhaps he knew that Padrino was the type of man who would wait for the right moment instead of risking himself in an impulsive coup. From San Carlos prison in the weeks following the failure, Chavez wrote to him, and Padrino says that from that moment he considered himself a Chavista, that he set out to spread that doctrine in music, the barracks, and that he became the silent soldier of a revolution that had not yet come to power. And then came the incredible. Between February and April 1995, the United States Army sent Lieutenant Music Padrino Lopez to the School of the Americas in Fort Benning, Georgia, psychological operations course. 3 months living in U.S. territory. Music, learning psychological warfare techniques from the same army that years Music later would accuse Venezuela of narco-terrorism. The School of the Americas, that legendary place where the United States trained Latin American military personnel during the Cold War, that place that critics call the School of Dictators. It's the place where some of the continent's most brutal repressors were trained. Padrino lived there for months. He ate in their dining halls, slept in their barracks, learned their methods. And when he left, he didn't renounce his revolutionary ideology. On the contrary, he reinforced it. That allowed me to know the monster in its entrails. He said years later, I learned the culture of vocation for expansionist colonialist power of the United States. But there's something Padrino doesn't mention in that phrase, something that history proved decades later. He also learned how the American system works, how companies are registered, how properties are bought, how money moves in the country he supposedly hated. Because when the time came to hide his fortune, when his family needed a safe place for their millions, they didn't choose Russia, they didn't choose China, they didn't choose Cuba, they didn't choose Iran. They chose the United States, the same country where Padrino had spent those months, music in 1995. They're the monster whose entrails he knew as well. The revolutionary with Lenin's name had learned the most important lesson of capitalism. No matter what you say in public, what matters is where you keep your money. There is a moment that defines the life of Vladimir Padrino Lopez, a moment that explains how a battalion commander became the indispensable man of Venezuela, a moment that occurred in April, music of 2002. Hugo Chavez had been in power for 3 years. The opposition, businessmen, sectors of the armed forces, and the United States wanted to remove him. Protests, music filled the streets. The tension was unbearable. On April 11th, 2002, the situation exploded. High-ranking military officers rose up against Chavez. General Lucas Rinskin announced on national television that the president had resigned. Chavez was arrested and taken to a military base on La Ochila Island. Pedro Carmona, president of the Federation of Chambers of Commerce, proclaimed himself president. For 48 hours, Venezuela had another government. For 48 hours, Chavism seemed defeated. For 48 hours, every Venezuelan officer had to make the most important decision of his life. Which side are you on? Vladimir Padrino Lopez was commander of the Simón Bolívar Infantry Battalion, stationed at Fort Tiuna, the country's most important military complex. Other commanders joined the coup. Padrino, music refused. While generals betrayed, Padrino remained loyal. While the high command abandoned Chávez, Padrino defended his barracks. While television showed images of the resignation, Padrino waited and was right, music to wait. On April 13th, yet a massive popular mobilization demanded Chávez's return. Loyal military forces counterattacked. Carmona's government collapsed in less than 72 hours. Chávez returned triumphant to Miraflores, and Vladimir Music Padrino Elguipes was marked forever as one of the loyal ones, one who didn't waver, one who deserved reward. Chávez never forgot. The following years, Music were of methodical ascent. Padrino was never the brightest in exams, never the most charismatic in speeches, music, but he had something more valuable than talent. He had loyalty proven in the fire. Battalion commander, brigade commander, brigadier general, division general. In 2012, just months before Chávez's death, Padrino was named second commander and chief of the general staff of the Bolivarian Army, Music. On July 5, 2012, now many Venezuelans saw Vladimir Padrino for the first time on television. He led the Independence Military Parade in the presence of a Hugo Chávez already visibly ill. Music, swollen from cancer treatments. With only a few months of life left, Padrino, already with the rank of general, declared before the cameras that he and his men were Bolivarians, socialists, anti-imperialists, music, and revolutionaries, a phrase that broke the supposedly apolitical role of the armed forces. A phrase that made it clear that the Venezuelan army was no longer neutral, it was Chavista. Chávez died, music, in March 2013. Nicolás Maduro, a man without charisma, without military training, without the emotional connection that Chávez had with music, the people inherited power, and Maduro understood something fundamental. Without the backing of the armed forces, he wouldn't last 6 months. He needed a strong man in the Ministry of Defense, a man who would guarantee the loyalty of the generals, a man who would keep the soldiers on the side of Chavism, even when the economy collapsed, when people started dying of hunger, when millions began to flee the country. On October 24, 2014, Nicolás Maduro appointed Vladimir Padrino Lopez as Minister of Defense. 51 years old, General-in-Chief, the man who had proven his loyalty in the most critical moment, music. The appointment was ratified in 2019, ratified again in 2022, 11 years in office. The Minister of Defense who has held that position the longest in Venezuela's recent history. Why so long? Because Maduro knows that without Padrino, the regime falls. Because the generals respect Padrino. Because Padrino controls the 4 components of the armed forces, Army, Navy, Aviation, and the crucial Bolivarian National Guard, music, the one that represses protests in the streets. But that power has a price. In 2017, when protests against Maduro filled the streets, music of Venezuela for months, Padrino gave the orders. The National Guard responded with tear gas, buckshot, music bullets. Human Rights Watch pointed to him as one of the high commands implicated in widespread abuses. The Venezuelan Observatory of Social Conflict documented music, more than 160 deaths since 2014. In many opposition homes, when someone mentions Bolivar's phrase, "Cursed be the soldier who points his weapon at his people," that soldier has a face. Vladimir Padrino Lopez. In September 2018, the U.S. Department of the Treasury sanctioned him for his role in consolidating Maduro's power. In 2019, he was formally accused of cocaine trafficking in a federal music court. The reward, $10 million, increased to $15 million in 2025. Padrino responded by calling it a crude hoax, music, an American electoral conspiracy. He remained in his position, continued controlling the weapons, remained untouchable until the early morning of January 3, 2026. January 3, 2026, 2 a.m., Caracas sleeps under one of its usual blackouts. The city is a dark mouth where only the emergency lights of hospitals, without medicines and the generators of the few who music can afford them, shine. Then the sky breaks, the sound comes first, a low hum that turns into a roar, helicopters flying, music low. Yeah, so low that the windows of buildings near Fort Tiuna vibrate as if an earthquake were being born. Music under the asphalt. Then come the explosions. The neighbors of the most important military zone in Venezuela wake up with music, the roar of bombs impacting the La Music Carlota air base. They see the lights of the spotlights cutting through the darkness. They hear bursts that last seconds, music, and then a silence more terrifying than the noise. Operation Absolute Termination had begun. 150 U.S. military aircraft took off from 20 bases in the Western Hemisphere. Fighters, bombers, special operations helicopters, music-armed Reaper drones. The largest military deployment in the region since the Cuban music missile crisis in 1962. The objectives were precise and devastating. The La Carlota Air Base in Caracas, Sada Music the Charalave Air Base in Miranda State, the Iguerote Airport, military installations in La Guaira, and Music Aragua. Donald Trump watched everything in real time from a room in Mar-a-Lago. I watched it literally as if music I were watching a TV show, he would say later. The speed, the violence was something amazing. No one else could have done something like that. The American planes destroyed Venezuelan air defenses. The helicopters advanced at sea level toward Caracas. One of them took bullet impacts, music, while approaching Fort Tiuna. It kept flying, and then Delta Force entered. 2:11 a.m., MH-60 and MH-47 helicopters music land in the most protected military complex in Venezuela. U.S. Army commandos, the same special forces that eliminated Osama bin Laden, jump onto the asphalt. The resistance was minimal, 47 seconds. That's how long it took the American operators to locate Nicolas Maduro in his residence, neutralize security, knock down the armored door, handcuff him along with his wife Celia Flores, and drag him to the helicopter that would take him out of Venezuela forever. They didn't even give them time to get dressed. They took them out in pajamas. According to the Minister of Defense, Vladimir Pedrino Lopez, much of the presidential security ring was taken down. A high-ranking U.S. official confirmed to the New York Times that at least 80 people died during the operation. 32 of them were Cuban bodyguards from the Black Wasps, Special Forces. Maduro and Flores were loaded onto the helicopter, from there to the warship USS Music, Iwo Jima, a stop at Guantanamo Base, transferred to a plane, landing in New York on Saturday afternoon. The dictator who had governed Venezuela for 11 years was handcuffed in a cell at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. But in the midst of the chaos, amid the smokes and sirens and screams, there was something that didn't add up, something lost in the headlines of victory. The Minister of Defense was not there. Vladimir Pedrino Lopez, the man who controlled the armed forces, who had eyes and ears in every corner, music of the country, who knew when an opponent sneezed at the border, was not at Fort Tiuna that night. He wasn't at Miraflores Palace. He wasn't at any of the safe houses. He wasn't defending his president. He had disappeared. The hours that followed were of a sepulchral silence. While the world celebrated Maduro's fall, while images of the handcuffed dictator circled the planet, Vladimir Pedrino Lopez issued no statement, didn't appear on television, didn't call for resistance, nothing. And then, when the sun was already beginning to peek over a Caracas in shock, he appeared not handcuffed, not detained, not in a helicopter bound for Colorado. Music. He appeared in a television studio, calm, groomed, with an impeccable uniform, and the firm voice of someone who has slept 8 hours while his country burned. This invasion represents the greatest affront the country has suffered, he said, looking at the camera without a single tremor in his voice. The country is in complete calm. Music, complete calm. The president had just been kidnapped by foreign forces, and the Minister of Defense spoke of complete calm. Music. The question exploded on social media, in the hallways of the Pentagon, in newsrooms around the world. Where was Vladimir Pedrino Lopez while they captured Maduro? How did the man who supposedly music controlled state security escape? Why didn't the American helicopters' music go for him too? Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, responded with a phrase that left more shadows than light. They are still in power? Was it an intelligence error, a tactical decision, or something darker? Because someone had to confirm that Maduro would be at Music Fort Tiuna that night. Someone had to guarantee that resistance would be minimal. Someone had to know exactly how many guards there were, where they were positioned, what the blind spots were. The man who knew everything, the man who heard everything, the man who today walks free through Music Caracas while his boss rots in a cell thousands of kilometers away. Today, January 16th, 2026, as I write these words, Nicolas Music Maduro is at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. He eats from plastic trays, sleeps on a metal cot. He awaits his trial for narco-terrorism in a federal court in Manhattan. Vladimir Padrino Lopez is in Caracas, appears on television, gives orders, still controls the Bolivarian National Armed Force, music, the dictator captured, the minister free. How is that possible? The days following Maduro's capture were of calculated silence. Padrino appeared 48 music hours later in uniform surrounded by military commanders. He demanded Maduro's immediate release. He called the operation a criminal kidnapping. He accused the United States of cold-blooded murder of the presidential security team. 47 members of the armed forces died that morning, he confirmed later. And 32 of them were Cubans from the Black Wasps Special Music Forces. Maduro's security ring was almost completely taken down, but Padrino wasn't there. On January 5th, the Supreme Court of Justice, controlled by Chavism, determined music that Maduro's capture was a temporary absence, not an absolute vacancy. Delcy Rodriguez was sworn in as acting president. She can govern for up to 6 months without calling elections. Padrino appeared at the ceremony seated next to Diosdado Cabello, the Minister of the Interior who controls intelligence services. Both flanking Delcy, the message was clear. Real power is not with the acting president, it's with the two men who control the weapons and espionage. On January 13th, Padrino posted a message on Telegram. He acknowledged that Venezuela faces a new reality after the events of January 3rd, music. He said the armed forces must stand firm to ensure the continuity of the state. He spoke of aligning with this new juncture. New reality, new juncture, the words of a man who knows everything has changed. Diosdado Cabello in a press conference said the country is in tense calm, but calm, that there were meetings with European Union diplomats who perceived normalization, tense calm, normalization, the words of a regime seeking to survive without its leader. Donald Trump said the United States will administer Venezuela temporarily, that American companies will enter to exploit the oil, that he is already in contact with Delcy Rodriguez, and that she told him, "We will do whatever you need." Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, explained music why they didn't capture Padrino and Diosdado that night too, so. "You wanted us to land at 5 other military bases?" he asked sarcastically. The mission was designed to minimize risks. The objective was Maduro, only Maduro. But the question still hangs in the air. The United States offers $15 million for Vladimir Padrino Lopez. It accuses him of conspiracy music to distribute cocaine, of charging protection fees to drug trafficking organizations, of allowing the transit of drug-laden aircraft from Venezuela, music to Central America. He has the same charges as Maduro, the same accusation, the same file in the Southern District of New York, but Maduro is imprisoned and Padrino is free. Music? Why? There are several theories, none officially confirmed, all disturbing. First theory, the United States couldn't capture everyone in one night without causing total collapse. Yet they needed to leave a functional power structure to negotiate the transition. Padrino and Diosdado are that structure. Second theory, Padrino has information too valuable. He knows the complete drug trafficking routes. He knows the connections with Russia, Iran, China, Cuba. He has files on everyone. He's worth more as a witness than as a prisoner. Third theory, Padrino is already negotiating. The secret meetings, the diplomatic channels, the tense calm, everything points to conversations we don't see. A silent agreement to avoid chaos. Fourth theory, the darkest. Padrino knew the attack was coming. Someone had to confirm that Maduro would be music at Fortuna that night. Someone had to guarantee minimal resistance. The man who controls military intelligence, the man who disappeared just before the bombing, betrayal, survival, or simply the cold calculation of a general who always knew how to choose the winning side. In 2002, music, when other generals betrayed Chávez, Padrino remained loyal. That loyalty made him indispensable. In 2026, when they captured Maduro, Padrino survived. That survival makes him suspicious. But suspicious or not, traitor or survivor, accomplice or negotiator, there is an undeniable fact. Vladimir Padrino Lopez, music, remains free, still controls the weapons, remains the most dangerous man in Venezuela, and as long as he remains free, the questions have no answer. Think about the arc of this story. A child is born in Caracas in 1963. His father, a convinced communist, names him Vladimir, music, after Lenin, after the father of the Soviet Union. From the cradle, that child was destined music to fight capitalism, to destroy imperialism, to build a world where private property was abolished, music, and workers controlled the means of production. 63 years later, that child turned general has his family living in Florida mansions. 24 companies between the United States, music, and Venezuela. 14 properties valued at $4.5 million. One of those companies processes asylums music for Venezuelans fleeing the regime he protects with tanks. What would Lenin say today if he saw his namesake? The father dreamed of a revolutionary. He created a capitalist disguised as a socialist, a man who publicly shouts death to the empire, while privately building his fortune in the heart of that empire. The numbers are devastating. More than 11 years as Minister of Defense, the record in Venezuela's recent history. No other military man has controlled the country's weapons for so long. No other has had so much power over tanks, music planes, military bases, and arsenals. $15 million. That's the reward the United States offers for information leading to his arrest. More than for many drug lords, more than for Mexican cartel leaders, only surpassed by Maduro and Diosdado Cabello on Venezuela's most wanted list. 24 family companies, from paint factories to political asylum management, from real estate companies to businesses no one can track. A corporate labyrinth designed so no prosecutor can music directly connect the general to the millions he controls. 14 properties in U.S. territory, houses in Houston, mansions in Broward, residences in Weston, none in the name of Vladimir Padrino Lopez, all in the name of uncles, cousins, daughters, wife. The perfect system of front men, $4.5 million in real estate in the country his government calls the empire. Music, in the country whose flag he burns in official acts, in the country that is supposedly the mortal enemy of the Bolivarian Revolution. And meanwhile, 25 million Venezuelans survive on $5 of minimum wage per month. But there's something more disturbing than the numbers. On January 3, 2026, when American helicopters bombed Caracas and captured Nicolas Maduro, music in 47 seconds, Vladimir Padrino Lopez was not where he should have been. The Minister of Defense defended nothing, gave no orders to resist, didn't mobilize troops, didn't try to rescue his president, simply disappeared, music, and when he reappeared, he spoke of complete calm while the country burned. Maduro today rots in an isolation cell in Colorado. Padrino Lopez walks free through Caracas. He still controls the armed forces, still gives orders. He still appears on television with an impeccable uniform and the firm voice of someone who knows no one can touch him. Why? He knows too much to be captured. Is he negotiating information in exchange for immunity? Was he part of a secret agreement that allowed music Maduro's capture? Or did he simply have the luck of not being in the wrong place that early morning? The questions have no answer, but there is one certainty. Venezuela will not heal as long as the accomplices walk free. It's not enough to capture the visible face. The entire music system must be dismantled. Every general who took bribes from drug trafficking, every minister who signed corrupt contracts, every relative who laundered money in tax havens and the mansions in Florida are still there. Built with the hunger of millions, paid for with the misery of a people, inhabited by the family of a man who swore to defend the homeland and ended up plundering it. The revolutionary with Lenin's name, the socialist, music, with a capitalist empire, the defender of the homeland with fortune in the enemy country, the most wanted minister who remains free. That is the story of Vladimir Padrino Lopez, and that story has not ended. Will he be the next to fall, or will his secrets protect him forever? Will he end up in a cell next to Maduro, or die of old age counting his millions on some Caribbean beach? If you made it this far, you now know the truth. Now the question is different. How much more will Venezuela have to pay for the betrayal of those who swore to protect it? Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, because justice in Venezuela is just beginning, and Vladimir Padrino Lopez knows his turn could come at any moment. The algorithm wants to bury these stories. Your click is the only thing that can keep them alive.